What is up? What is up? We are talking booty building today. We're going to talk about one of my all-time favorite glute exercises, the single leg hip thrust. If you have ever done it, you know the burn that comes, even unweighted. So we're going to talk about how to do it, what are the most common mistakes, how to program it, all things single leg hip thrust. You can see my setup over here. But before we get there, the inaugural episode of The Mom Files, where I spill the tea on what it is like to be a mom of 3 teenagers, who, by the way, would be completely horrified that I just used that expression because I am far too old to be speaking teenager. Okay, these are my monkeys, and this is my circus. The hippie, dear daughter, and last but not least, the middle child. In upcoming episodes of The Mom Files, you'll be privy to all the shenanigans that leave me looking like this. But for now, any guesses as to which slog came home from study hall an ordained minister? While you're mulling that one over, time for the tutorial. Single leg hip thrust. Let's go. Setup for the single leg hip thrust is exactly the same as for the hip thrust. If you are not yet familiar with hip thrusting, start there. Set up in front of a bench so that the bench is hitting you just under your shoulder blades. That's going to be the point you hinge from. About 12 to 14 inches tall works really well. From here, you're going to pick one leg up. I prefer to keep it bent as shown here, and then hinging from under your shoulder blades and keeping your ribs down, you're going to press through the heel of the standing leg, come all the way up until your hips are fully extended, squeeze your glutes hard, and then come back down. Notice my head positioning. I have a forward eye gaze. I'm looking forward the whole time, even when I'm in the top position. So I keep my chin tucked and my eyes face forward. This helps to make sure you're not going to hyperextend your back, but you're using your glutes instead. Let's cover a couple of really common mistakes with the single leg hip thrust. First is in the setup, setting up with your back up way too high on the bench like I'm doing there. You see that? That's not where we want the pivot point. We want to have the pivot point be just under my shoulder blades, just like that. Okay, I talked about having a forward eye gaze. You can see here, if I'm not doing that, how I tend to hyperextend my back. See how when I'm looking up, I hyperextend. And that's not to say it's wrong to look up. You can. If you're going to do that, you want to be really sure that you're not hyperextending your back. I find it's easier to just go ahead and have that forward eye gaze. You want to pay attention to your arm positioning. There's a tendency to grip onto the bench and to push through your arms. See, my bench is kind of shorter. Imagine if it was a little bit longer, how I would be grabbing on or pushing through with my arms. Instead, I prefer to put my arms with the backs of my arms in front of the bench, and then I'm not able to use my hands and arm strength to make the move happen at all. Let's talk a little bit more about your torso positioning. There's this tendency to flare your ribs up, to arch your lower back, and then at the top of the movement to finish with your back instead of with your glutes. Instead, you want to tuck your pelvis under like you were a dog getting in trouble and you're tucking your tail. Think about closing the distance between your ribs and your hips. And then at the top of the movement, you finish by squeezing your glutes instead of with your lower back. Another super common mistake is just not getting the full range of motion. You want to make sure you're coming all the way up at the top. Look at the difference. Boom. You see that? Squeeze your glute hard, come all the way up. Now, foot positioning is super important so that you make sure you're hitting your glutes. If you set up with your feet too far out in front of you, you're actually going to be recruiting more hamstrings, so the backs of your thighs, which is totally cool if that's what you are looking to work on. Then, if you set up with your feet really close in, you're actually going to be hitting more quad. And there's also a tendency to come up on your toe doing this, which you don't want to do in any case. So if you're looking to hit your glutes the most, you want to set up so that at the top of the motion, your knees are roughly a 90-degree angle and your shins are roughly vertical. You see that? Remember what I said about pushing through your toe? This is what you don't want to do. You're not looking to push through your toe like that. Instead, you want to be pushing through your heel. Okay, that covers things as far as form is concerned. So this is a really challenging move as is, but if you want to make it even more challenging, there are a few things you can do. You can add a half rep. You can add a pause at the top. You can add a slow eccentric, so coming down for a slow count of 3 or 4 or 5. You can add a band. Put a mini band on just above your knees and then focus on pressing out against the band as you go up and down. And you're really going to be able to feel that kind of in your side butt. Of course, you can add a weight with a dumbbell. These are super, super challenging. Now, if these are too challenging for you to do with really great form, stick with doing some regular hip thrusts and practice doing single leg on the floor with your back on the floor, doing single leg glute bridges, and work your way up from there. So give these a go. Add them into your training program on your lower body or full body days towards the middle to end of your training. 3 to 4 sets of 8 to 12 reps per side. You could go even a little higher than that. Just make sure you keep your form really good. And there you have it. Everything you need to know about the single leg hip thrust. Of course, it was the middle child who came home from high school study hall, an ordained minister. He hopped online to shop for robes and vestments, and he's especially interested in securing a tall hat for when he performs weddings.